the evening had turned tense after my latest fight with Monica. This time, the tension was thick, impenetrable, and felt like it might suffocate me if I stayed in the house. Her words echoed in my head, filling the space like an incessant ringing. It wasn't just the argument itself, it was the quiet, pervasive coldness that seemed to linger long after the shouting had stopped. In frustration, I grabbed my keys and left, barely registering Monica's distant figure through the crack in the door as I stepped outside. I walked for a while, thinking the crisp air would clear my head, but every step only seemed to deepen the spiraling storm within me. I kept replaying our argument, the way Monica's eyes had hardened, her voice laced with bitterness I hadn't heard before. It wasn't the first time jealousy had bubbled up between us, but this time, I felt like something fundamental was beginning to unravel. Maybe I was becoming paranoid, maybe I'd pushed her too far. The one thing I knew was that I couldn't fix it alone. I needed someone who could listen, someone who might have some advice or, at the very least, a sympathetic ear. That's when I thought of Robert, an old friend who'd seen me through countless life events, both the highs and lows. We hadn't spoken as much in recent years, but our bond was the kind you could always rely on, no matter how much time had passed. After a brief hesitation, I called him up, and, to my relief, he agreed to meet me at a local bar. The bar was dimly lit, buzzing with the chatter of people trying to forget the troubles of their own lives. Robert was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and offering me that familiar, comforting nod. He listened as I explained everything, from the petty arguments to the explosive accusations, to my gnawing jealousy and the subtle signs from Monica that felt like red flags but might have just been figments of my growing paranoia. Robert didn't interrupt. He just watched me, nodding every so often, his expression compassionate but inscrutable. When I finished, he took a slow sip, considering his words carefully. "Jack," he finally said, his voice calm but firm, "it sounds like you're both trapped in a cycle of mistrust. Have you thought about what's causing that jealousy? I mean, honestly thought about it?" I tried to answer but realized I wasn't sure. Was it insecurity? Had I let some unfounded fear start poisoning what was once a solid relationship? It felt like Robert had seen straight through me, down to a vulnerability I hadn't wanted to admit even to myself. Back at home, though, things were moving differently. Monica was alone in the quiet house, which now felt emptier and colder than ever without Jack. She paced around, her own frustrations bubbling up as she replayed their fight in her mind. Each corner of the house was a reminder of the life they'd built together, now feeling strangely fragile. Robert's words kept drawing me deeper into a place I hadn't wanted to go. He spoke carefully, talking about the need for self-reflection, for understanding why my suspicions had become such a part of me in the last few months. He kept his voice low, like he was talking me through some delicate procedure, and every word seemed to scrape at a raw nerve. Maybe he was right. Maybe jealousy had become a disease, twisting the way I saw Monica, making me question everything. But then, he asked, "Have you actually talked to Monica about all this, Jack? I mean really, honestly talked? Without jumping straight to accusations?" I almost laughed at the simplicity of it. Communication, like it was the answer to all our problems. But when I opened my mouth to answer, I found myself caught, unsure of what I'd actually said to her lately that didn't sound like frustration or barely concealed doubt. How many conversations had we brushed aside, each of us stubbornly clutching our own versions of reality? Maybe he was onto something. I thought I did. But, it just ends up in more fighting. Every time, I finally admitted, feeling an odd mix of relief and shame. Robert nodded, pausing thoughtfully. "You're fighting because you both care," he said, as if it were that simple. "If you didn't care, there'd be no arguing, no trying to make things work. But maybe she feels like she's losing you, too." Losing me? The thought caught me off guard. Here I was, feeling like I was the one losing her, that she was the one slipping away. I thought about all the times we'd sat in silence, each waiting for the other to bridge the growing gap. Robert's words unraveled that thought, teasing out the possibility that my own doubts, my own walls, had kept her at arm's length, maybe pushing her further away than I'd realized. Then, as if snapping me back to reality, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with a notification, but it was the familiar icon from the camera app that made my heart skip a beat. I stared down, a strange feeling washing over me, part dread, part curiosity, and something else I couldn't name. I thought about ignoring it, about just shoving the phone back in my pocket and keeping my attention on Robert's advice, but the nagging suspicion had a grip on me. I unlocked my phone, and a small, blurry snapshot from the living room camera appeared. The details were hazy, but it was unmistakably Monica, standing in the dim light, phone pressed to her ear, her face focused and serious. A strange smile curved her lips, one I hadn't seen in years, relaxed, almost mischievous, like she was preparing for something, or someone. My stomach twisted as I watched, unable to look away. My finger hovered over the screen, reluctant to press further but equally desperate to see more. "Jack? You okay?" Robert's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts, and I glanced up at him, knowing my face must have given something away. I swallowed, unable to find words for a second. I set up cameras at the house. Just to, make sure." My voice trailed off as I felt the full weight of what I was about to admit. I didn't want to be this person, the kind who had to spy on his own wife just to feel some semblance of security. But here I was, a live feed refreshing on my phone, my heart pounding as I watched the truth I'd been afraid of unfolding in front of me. Monica moved toward the front door, her expression softening as she unlocked it. And then, there he was, a tall, shadowed figure, stepping into the house with a casual familiarity that made my chest tighten. He wrapped his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him, her eyes lighting up in a way that was all too telling. The sight of it sucked the air from my lungs, and all of Robert's words about communication and trust seemed to evaporate. This wasn't an issue of jealousy or mistrust, it was a betrayal, unfolding in real time on the screen in my hand. Robert leaned forward, his face lined with concern. "Jack, what's happening?" Without thinking, I turned the screen toward him, unable to look up at his reaction. "It's Monica." I thought maybe, but I didn't actually think. My voice cracked, raw with disbelief and pain. The screen refreshed again, capturing them as they made their way into the living room. They were laughing, their bodies close, every gesture filled with an ease and intimacy that felt like a punch to the gut. Robert's expression darkened, his eyes flickering between me and the screen. "Jack, I'm so sorry," he murmured, shaking his head. I don't know what to say." But I didn't really hear him. My eyes stayed glued to the live feed, unable to tear myself away from the painful truth that was staring back at me. They moved through the house, Monica leading him down the hallway toward our bedroom, her hand slipping into his as she glanced over her shoulder with a smile that now felt like a stranger's. It was so achingly familiar yet foreign, this life playing out in what should have been our private sanctuary, tainted now by the presence of another man. The notifications continued to come through, a painful rhythm that punctuated the reality of what was happening. I felt numb, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. Part of me wanted to bolt, to rush home and confront them, to rip him out of my house and demand answers from Monica. But another part of me was rooted to the spot, transfixed, horrified, but helpless to look away. This wasn't some miscommunication or misunderstanding, it was as real as it could get, and it was unfolding right in front of me, leaving no room for doubt, no sliver of hope that this could somehow be explained away. Robert's hand landed on my shoulder, grounding me back to reality. "Jack, maybe it's best if we go back. Or, if you just sit for a bit, think it over." I shook my head, swallowing hard. "I don't know, Rob. I don't know what to do." "Listen, I can come with you," he offered, his voice steady but soft. "Or we can sit here, and, whatever you need. I'm here." I glanced at him, seeing the worry etched in his expression, but the words felt hollow, distant. Nothing he could say, nothing anyone could say, would change what I'd seen. The damage was done, the image of her laughing in his arms seared into my memory. And as the feed shifted once more, capturing their shadows crossing the threshold of the bedroom, I felt a part of myself begin to unravel, slipping away with every agonizing second that passed. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen with Robert's hand still resting on my shoulder. Part of me was frozen, locked in a state of disbelief and numbing pain, while another part felt like it was spiraling out of control, caught in an endless loop of questions and doubts. My mind ran through every conversation, every moment, replaying it all with a new, painful lens, and yet nothing added up to this reality. The screen refreshed again, and there they were, in the bedroom now, the door barely closed behind them. I watched in silence, each second twisting a deeper, agonizing knife into my chest as I caught sight of their silhouettes moving closer, their laughter soft but cutting through me like shards of glass. It was intimate, a language they shared that was brutally foreign to me. "Jack, you don't have to keep watching," Robert said, his voice rough, as though he felt some of my pain. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to look away, to shove the phone into my pocket as if that simple act could erase what I'd just seen. But it was impossible. The images, the sounds, they were all there, carved into me with a permanence I couldn't escape. Robert leaned back, taking his time as he waited for me to speak. He didn't push, and for that, I was grateful. Eventually, I managed to whisper, "I don't know how it got here, Rob. How did we end up like this?" He shook his head slowly, thoughtful. "Sometimes, these things don't make sense. Sometimes, people do things we can't understand. But that doesn't mean it's about you, Jack. It doesn't mean you deserve it." His words hung in the air, comforting yet hard to grasp. I had spent so long looking for flaws in myself, for answers, that it seemed almost impossible to accept that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the one who'd pushed her away. But as I sat there, I started to feel something else bubbling under the initial shock. It was anger, raw, unfiltered anger, surging forward as the betrayal began to sink in. Robert must have sensed it because he placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Listen," he said, his voice firm, "if you go back now, you're walking into something you can't take back. You're in pain, you're angry, and if you confront her like this, I don't think it'll go well, Jack." He was right, of course. The rage, the sense of betrayal, it was building inside me like a pressure cooker. Going back now would mean unleashing all of that, letting it explode without control. And if I did that, there would be no calm conversation, no rational explanations, only anger and regret, a scene I'd never be able to take back. I couldn't even imagine how I'd feel afterward, but I knew it would only make everything worse. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt like a child, lost and vulnerable, grasping for something, anything to hold on to in the face of a crumbling reality. Robert sighed, leaning back as he thought. "Honestly? I think you need space, Jack. You need to clear your head, let this settle before you decide anything. We could book a hotel tonight, find a place where you can breathe and think things through. Tomorrow you can make a choice, a clear-headed one." The thought of sitting alone in a hotel room, with nothing but my thoughts and the images of Monica with another man, felt daunting, almost unbearable. But I knew he was right. Going home tonight, seeing her face, pretending nothing was happening, was even more impossible. I couldn't bear the thought of hearing her lies, watching her move around our home, knowing what I'd seen. And if I confronted her now, in the heat of the moment, it would likely spiral into something neither of us could control. "All right," I managed, finally meeting his gaze. "A hotel. Maybe that's best." Robert gave a nod of approval, already reaching for his phone to help find a nearby place. I watched him, grateful for his presence, his steady hand through this nightmare that had somehow become my life. As he booked a room, he offered to drive me there, and I nodded, feeling too numb to think straight or argue. I was thankful for the distraction, the sense of direction he provided when my own mind was too clouded by hurt and disbelief to function. The drive was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Every now and then, he'd cast a concerned glance my way, as if to make sure I wasn't about to fall apart. But I couldn't even find it in myself to speak. I just stared out the window, the streetlights blurring by, feeling as though I were watching someone else's life unravel from the back seat. When we arrived at the hotel, Robert helped me check in, handing me the key card and a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Jack," he said, his voice low but firm, "if you need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. All right?" I nodded, gripping the key card tightly as I tried to muster a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Rob. For everything." He nodded, his expression softening with sympathy. "Anytime, Jack. I'm here, remember that." With a last, comforting squeeze on my shoulder, he left, leaving me standing alone in the quiet hallway of the hotel. I turned toward the door, the cold, neutral decor of the hallway echoing the emptiness inside me. The sterile silence somehow felt fitting, like I'd stumbled into a world stripped of warmth, much like the remains of my marriage. Inside, the room was plain and functional, a bed, a desk, a TV mounted on the wall. I dropped onto the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of everything crashing down around me. The events of the night played back in my mind, relentless and vivid. Every glance, every laugh, every touch between Monica and that stranger flashed through my mind, each detail a painful reminder of the life I thought I had, now slipping away. The anger simmered beneath the surface, mingling with a deep, unshakable sorrow. I hadn't prepared for this, I hadn't thought anything could shake us this way. We'd built a life together, shared dreams, laughter, and late-night talks that felt like they would last forever. But now, with the betrayal raw and exposed, every memory felt tainted, every happy moment a lie. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I just sat there, lost in the turmoil of my own thoughts, as the quiet hours stretched on, one after the other. The walls seemed to close in on me as I replayed everything, every detail of our relationship that had led up to this moment. And by the time the early morning light began to filter through the thin hotel curtains, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The morning crept in slowly, the pale light barely breaking through the drawn curtains. I was still on the edge of the bed, exactly where I'd been for hours, staring at nothing, my mind and body numb. My thoughts circled back to Monica again and again, trying to pinpoint the exact moment our life had veered into this strange, dark place. Maybe it was foolish to think I could ever understand it. Maybe trying to make sense of it was just another way of clinging to something that was already gone. A low buzzing broke the silence, and I glanced down at my phone, half expecting it to be Robert checking in. Instead, I saw Monica's name on the screen. For a second, I considered ignoring it. I couldn't bear the thought of hearing her voice, of listening to whatever excuse or story she might try to spin. But a darker part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, to see if she'd lie straight to my face. My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating, before I finally pressed accept. I held the phone to my ear, feeling an unexpected pang of dread. "Jack?" Her voice was calm, almost casual, like any other morning. "Where are you? I woke up, and you weren't home." There was no apology, no hint of guilt, just the easy, unbothered tone that she'd had so often lately, the one that now felt like a carefully practiced mask. I swallowed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Just needed to clear my head," I replied, my tone clipped, careful. I waited, wondering if she'd hear the tension in my voice, if she'd recognize the shift that had changed everything between us overnight. But if she did, she didn't show it. "Oh, okay." She sounded almost relieved, as if she'd gotten away with something, as if my absence had only served to make her morning easier. "I thought we could have breakfast together." "We need to talk, Jack." My grip on the phone tightened, anger flaring up again. "You want to talk?" I managed to say, my voice strained. "Now you want to talk?" A long silence followed, her end of the line completely still. I pictured her standing there in the kitchen, maybe sipping her coffee with that same neutral expression I'd seen so many times. I wanted to confront her, to throw every accusation out there, to demand answers. But some part of me held back, a bitter, stubborn part that wanted her to be the one to admit it, to say it out loud. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "Yes, Jack," she finally replied, her tone soft but guarded. "I feel like, we've drifted, and it's not healthy. I want to know what's going on with us. My pulse quickened, and I felt the words I'd been holding back start to rise. What's going on with us? I asked, a slight edge in my voice. Monica, are you really asking me that? I heard her sigh, a small, frustrated sound. I am, Jack. I don't know why you've been so distant, so suspicious. You've been acting like, well, like you're expecting something to happen. Like you're waiting for me to make some mistake. The hypocrisy of her words hit me like a slap. She was playing innocent, feigning confusion, as if I were the one slowly unraveling the fabric of our life together. I felt a surge of anger, a raw, unfiltered rage that was almost painful in its intensity. Monica, stop, I said, my voice shaking. Don't act like you don't know what's going on. Don't act like this is all in my head. There was a beat of silence, and I could almost picture the slight tilt of her head, the faint, controlled look of surprise that she wore so well. I don't know what you mean, she replied evenly. Jack, if there's something on your mind, just say it. I can't keep guessing. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt my patience snap. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. How long, Monica? What? She asked, her voice faltering for the first time. How long has this been going on? I repeated, each word dropping like a weight. The sneaking around, the lies, how long have you been seeing him? There was another silence, longer this time, and I could feel her carefully calculating her next words, trying to find a way to keep the facade up. I could almost hear the gears turning, the careful, meticulous way she crafted her reply. I don't know what you're talking about, Jack, she finally said, her voice soft, almost hurt. I thought we were going to have an honest conversation. If you're going to accuse me of something, at least be clear about what it is. The feigned innocence, the deliberate deflection, it all hit me like a punch to the gut. Here she was, confronted with her betrayal, and instead of coming clean, she was twisting it back on me, turning my own hurt and doubt against me. It was a masterful performance, one that almost made me question myself. Almost. I know, Monica, I said, my voice low and controlled. I know about last night. I know about him. I've seen everything. Her silence on the other end was deafening, her carefully crafted mask slipping. I waited, giving her the chance to respond, to finally say something that resembled the truth. But the only sound was a shallow, uneven breath, a quiet gasp that told me everything I needed to know. Jack. I didn't, she started, her voice barely audible. Don't, I interrupted, my voice hard, unforgiving. Don't lie to me anymore, Monica. Not after what I've seen. She was silent again, and I could feel the weight of her guilt settling between us, heavy and undeniable. When she finally spoke, her tone was flat, resigned. I'm sorry, she said, the words hollow and empty. That was it. Just a simple apology, as if she'd accidentally forgotten an anniversary or missed a dinner reservation. As if it hadn't been a betrayal that tore through the very foundation of our life together. That's all you have to say? I asked, my voice breaking. After everything, all you can say is that you're sorry? She didn't answer, and I felt the final threads of our relationship snapping, the last remnants of trust and love crumbling into nothing. There was nothing left to say, no words that could undo the damage she'd done, no apology that could make up for the broken pieces she'd left in her wake. Without another word, I hung up, letting the silence fill the room once more. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, feeling an emptiness I couldn't begin to describe. It was over. The marriage, the love, the life we'd built together, it was all gone, reduced to ashes in a matter of minutes. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know how I'd face the days, the weeks, the months ahead. But as I sat there, alone in that hotel room, I knew one thing for certain, I was done being the man who held on to hope, done fighting for something that no longer existed. I was free now, untethered from the lies and the deceit. And while the emptiness hurt, it was also a relief, a cold but clean slate that, in time, might hold the promise of something real again. For now, though, All I could do was let go, to face the painful reality that I was alone, but maybe, just maybe, stronger for it. The weight of everything settled heavily on me as I sat there, still gripping the phone, staring at nothing in particular. The hotel room was quiet and empty, but even in that silence, the echoes of Monica's words, that empty, hollow apology, rang in my head. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped outside of my own life and was now watching it unfold from a distance. My world had collapsed in a matter of hours, and now I was left with nothing but fragments of memories, pieces of a life that no longer existed. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, unmoving, letting the enormity of it all wash over me. Eventually, though, something shifted, a flicker of determination sparking somewhere deep inside. I couldn't sit here forever, couldn't wallow in the ruins. If there was one thing I'd learned in life, it was that pain was inevitable, but staying stuck in it was a choice. I wasn't about to let this destroy me, not completely. I took a shaky breath and stood up, feeling the weight of the decision settle around me. I had to go home. Not to confront Monica, there was nothing left to confront, but to claim back the pieces of my life that were still mine. The thought of returning to the house, to the place that had once been my sanctuary, felt heavy and daunting, but there was also a strange resolve in it. I would go back, I'd face the aftermath, and I'd begin to pick up the pieces, not for her, not for us, but for me. The drive back was quiet, the early morning streets still shrouded in the kind of calm that comes just before the world wakes up. I was glad for the stillness, it allowed me to focus, to steel myself for what was to come. The house loomed into view as I turned onto our street, and for a moment, I hesitated, my heart pounding. This was it, the first step in the long, painful process of moving forward. When I walked through the front door, the house was eerily silent. Sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a cold, indifferent light over everything. I glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings, but it felt foreign, almost like stepping into someone else's life. The memories were still here, thick in the air, but they felt hollow now, empty shells of moments that had once held meaning. I found her in the kitchen, standing by the counter, staring down at the coffee mug in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide and uncertain. I didn't say anything, didn't acknowledge the faint guilt that flashed across her face. I just walked past her, moving through the house with a sense of finality, gathering the few things I knew I'd need in the coming days. Monica watched me, silent, her gaze following my every move. I could feel the weight of her regret, her unspoken words lingering between us, but I didn't offer her the solace of a conversation, didn't give her the satisfaction of any more of my time or energy. I'd wasted enough on her lies, on the web of deceit she'd spun right under my nose. As I reached the door, she finally spoke, her voice soft and tentative. "Jack. I didn't mean for it to end like this. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned to face her. She looked so small, so fragile, but I felt no sympathy, no lingering affection. The betrayal had left me hollow, and her words were just noise, meaningless and empty. "Funny thing is, Monica, I believed in us. I trusted you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And now? I don't know who you are, and I don't really care to find out." Her eyes filled with tears, and she opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and left, closing the door softly behind me, feeling an odd sense of relief wash over me. The weight was still there, the pain still raw, but there was also a strange clarity, a resolve that had been missing before. This was the beginning of something new, even if it was forged in heartbreak. As I stepped outside, I realized I was no longer the same person I'd been only a day ago. That version of myself, the one who had once trusted so completely, was gone. But in his place was someone different, someone a little more guarded, a little more resilient, and maybe, in time, a little stronger. I walked to my car, each step feeling lighter, more purposeful. I didn't have a plan, didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was done looking back. The road stretched out before me, open and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. As I drove away from the house that had once held my dreams, I felt a strange, bittersweet freedom settle over me. I'd been given a chance to start over, to rebuild from the ground up. And though the road ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns, I knew one thing for sure: I was free from the lies, free from the betrayal, and maybe, just maybe, free to find something real, something that was truly mine. And as I disappeared down the winding street, the morning sun casting its first light on a new day, I realized that this, in all its painful clarity, was the beginning of my own story, a story that was mine and mine alone.